With the final shape raid race coming and at least 18 inches of the witness to battle, you will need to be ready. I have a history of creating raid race stories, but this video will be the first ever raid race preparation. This will not be a best exotic to use or build that will convince my wife to leave her boyfriend video, but instead, true advice to get your contest emblem clear, and this will be the most evergreen advice you can really ask for. I have my experience of raid racing and clearing a lot of day one raids before this, but now my best talents are used for casting events like Raid Zone, which you can tune in this Friday, June 7th at 9 a.m. for. Listen guys, this one, we're going all out. We got big sponsors. I have my new robotic shaker. Go buy it right now, please. Link below. There will not only be emblems for watching, but an emblem for also subscribing to the stream. The window will be 2 whole days to get that emblem, and I will not be getting off for really any of that. Also, we're going to cover the entire world's first race, so make sure you guys are a part of it. Oh, and just in case you guys were curious on the credibility of this video, I asked a lot of world's first raiders and racers that are very, very competitive on day one. Okay, let's begin. This one is pretty obvious, but it goes hand in hand with some other points that we'll get to later. And that is, well, know the game. I know it's a really obvious tip to know the game in some ways, and while I'm not asking you to look for specific exotics for everything, what I am asking you is to at least know what you're gonna do going into the fights. All I'm asking is that you at least know that you need 100 resil, you need some stat variations that are gonna help you in some ways, and to really understand your own build.
Most important things for day one. One, make sure you always have a buff applied, whether that's Radiant or whatever. Radiant's probably the easiest one to do. Make sure there's a debuff applied. It might change depending on what the artifact is, but either Tractor or Div are always solid options. It could be subject to change depending on how the Divinity nerf works in the final shape, but it's usually pretty safe bet. Second of which is just playing your life. It's not worth getting 3 extra bullets if you're having like ammo reserves on your chest piece. You can do swaps because some players do that, but always prioritize playing your life and playing consistent, because damage is usually never a big issue on day one as long as you have people who just know how to shoot their gun when it's damage time. That is one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of teams make, is when it's damage time, there's people, I don't know, they're off in La La Land. I don't know what's going on in their brain, to be honest. But when it's damage time, you need to be dumping everything you can into the boss while making sure you stay alive. So a boss is targeting you, move away, reposition, and just keep dumping.
The next piece of advice that you will need is to be a meta slave in this kind of activity, or sometimes not. Obviously, understanding all of the sorts of things that you're going to need is going to be super helpful, but day one is really different. It doesn't matter whether you enjoy using off-meta underground picks, because 9 times out of 10, they won't be as effective as the best weapons, exotics, and supers in the game. However, it also has to be said that it probably isn't the best idea to try to learn some extremely hard damage rotations for now, given that we don't have a lot of time before the next raid race, and most of the time those damage rotations come from knowledge of how the boss already works. For instance, some of you may have seen how good Radiant Dance Machine's damage rotations are in the right context. The damage is definitely good, but it's a little hard to pull off. Remember, day one racing is a marathon, not a sprint. You're not going for a speed run. If you're going for world's first, then I really hope you're taking notes right now. For the rest of you, just remember that all you need to do is get the clear. It's important to use the most optimal strategies, but it doesn't mean that you have to learn an insane build that'll get you 20 million damage and convince your wife, again, to leave her boyfriend. Stick to your guns, literally. Just don't go into the raid with double primaries, unless that's what the witness needs. I don't know. Don't believe me? Here's what some world's first raiders and some day one racers had to say.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems I see teams do in day one raids is attempt to utilize damage strategies that they are either new to using and can't execute perfectly, or that are just completely unreasonable to do given the circumstances of the encounter. You're in unfamiliar territory and you don't know the mechanics well enough to be treating it like a sprint, not a marathon. It's always better in day one raids to be using the easy, safe damage that you're comfortable with and you've used multiple times before, not something you saw on a YouTube video the day before the raid launched. Most day 1 raid encounters are going to take you the maximum or near maximum number of phases that you can do. I'm sure there are teams out there, but 99.9% of teams are taking the maximum number of phases, so don't try to be in that 0.1% of teams that are able to squeeze out just that little bit extra bit of damage to make it take 3 phases instead of 4 phases. A lot of those strategies require double special too, which I think is trolling in a day 1 raid. Having one primary ad clear weapon with infinite ammo is always going to be the go-to, especially because if you use all of your ammo in that damage phase, you're now out of luck after the damage phase when you need to get back to damage and you have no ammo.
I think the main point is just use what's simple and use what works. Like, similar to if it works, it works. Just find something simple that works for damage and use it. Take Crota for an example. We tried rockets. We tried find ways to make rotations work. It didn't feel good. We just ended up defaulting back to Lament, which is something that's so simple. It's been nerfed before, but it got the job done. So just find something that works, find something that you know is strong, find something that's worked throughout the meta, and just keep it simple for damage. You don't want to go with overly complicated things that can end up having more stuff go wrong or lead to more issues or lead to potential wipes in second or third phases or final stands.
That actually brings me into my next point. Lose the ego in both ways. If you load into the raid, try the first encounter, and realize your team are doing something wrong, own up to the mistake and try to work out how you can do whatever you were doing different next time. It's so important to ask questions if you don't quite understand a mechanic, and to listen to the people around you when you need a bit of help. This goes both ways though. You may have the Godslayer title. You may have been raiding since the day you were born. You may be Saltagreppo's secret twin brother. None of this matters if you order people around and make them feel like shit. The secret to helping people is to remember it's a team game. Point out their mistakes in a way that makes them want to continue.
Basically, like, if you're running one of these races, ideally you are on a team with 5 other people that you trust and that, you know, or you think they're a similar skill level to yourself. So I think having that trust in your teammates is probably one of the most important things in a race. You don't necessarily have to do everything yourself. There will be times and encounters where you just don't really understand what other members of your team are doing, and that's fine. You should just trust them to handle that stuff, and you focus on your task, whatever, you know, actually gets you through the encounter. And to that point, if somebody on your team is, you know, slightly messing up, you know, constantly calling them out or like pretending that you could do something better and things like that, just the bickering doesn't really ever help. Like, doing things like that, try to see what you can do to help them out in whatever role that they're doing. Just being comfortable with your teammates and not egoing them and understanding that you don't have to know everything that's going on in an encounter is pretty important.
There's a world of difference between a good raider and being a good teacher. Sure, it might be frustrating when people mess things up, but don't get rude. Don't make passive-aggressive comments. Don't sigh like you're being told off by a teacher. The morale of the team is really important. And if your role is to be the IGL or in-game leader, part of your job is making sure everyone stays happy, confident, and eager to give it another shot. I can't count the amount of teams that I've been on that dissolve within an hour because someone throws a hissy fit. Before we move on, I do want to build on my previous point in a slightly different way. You need to stay patient during the raid because it's not going to be easy. And you're not going to get a flawless clear on your first try. Things will go wrong, but that doesn't mean that you're doomed to fail when you try again. Something that will lead straight to failure is expecting everyone to get everything right on their first go, and getting irritated when things don't go as planned. As I said before, this is a marathon, not a sprint, and you have to be prepared for it to take a while.
The biggest takeaway I have from years of raiding is accepting the fact that you are going to make mistakes. It is natural to be frustrated, but it's also important that you channel that frustration towards something productive instead of letting it affect your gameplay or, even worse, ruin the atmosphere with the team. To build that trust, it's important that you actually play together as a team to learn each other's strengths and weaknesses so that roles can come naturally, like whether players prefer working on solving and executing mechanics, leading the encounter with comms, or ensuring that ad clear is good, as every aspect becomes critically important in day 1 contest rating. On top of that, you have to listen to and trust your teammates, because if something fails as a result, you learn and grow from that rather than be upset that a single wipe happened. In summary, build your cohesion and efficiency as a unit, because this is a vital attribute common across all teams that aspire to compete for World First or just clear a raid on day 1.
You've now got your 100 resil. You've watched some videos about the weapons. You've watched Raid Zone before going in for your attempt, or you're watching along since we'll be following the lead. And you know that your team is pretty chill. What more can you do to prepare for day 1 raids? Well, quite a lot actually. Some of you will have been bounty prepping already, so feel free to ignore this section. But for those of you who haven't, don't think that you've completely missed the boat on this one. It might not be possible to do all of the possible prep the others have done, but you should get prepared to grind your heart out before the raid releases. The main reason for doing this is to get access to the artifact mod that Bungie shared with us in the most recent TWID. If you look at the list of mods, which you absolutely should be doing by the way, you'll see that some of them are really potent and a lot of day one potential for raids. I want to keep this section evergreen, and I also want to say that some mods may get disabled, or some artifact mods may get disabled on day one. Bungie has a history of doing that. But I also want to make it very, very clear, you should know the artifact to some degree going into day one raiding. Or else, you might be missing a lot of extra damage and damage resist that would be really helpful. This is an issue that is prevalent in the higher tiers of both PvE and PvP. It is unbelievably valuable in both. In raiding, especially when you have active contest mode, people need to be able to focus on their roles. If you go for the hero moment and die, someone else needs to come pick you up. Otherwise, you'll probably wipe the encounter. On the flip side, it doesn't necessarily matter if something is slightly delayed, as long as you can stay alive long enough to keep going 2 seconds later. This also means that you should make builds centered around staying alive, to learn the environments and have a nice easy run to the damage. Then build outward to what you may need to get the kill. Banner of War for Titans, Restoration Spam for Warlocks, Invis Hunters, probably Prismatic given Final Shape is going to be what it is. All of these things can be invaluable when you're just trying to get to damage. This extends to weapons. Is Whisper of the Worm really going to ad clear the entire room? It might do some damage to the boss, but that's one enemy after solving mechanics involving tons of enemies. I want to make this really clear. If you're dying too much, take off your high damage build and put on something else that will keep you alive. Sure, it might not mean hitting top DPS on the wipe screen, but it could mean the difference between the boss kill and seeing another wipe screen. Prioritize staying alive, getting your roll done, and worry about the damage later. One of the hard truths about day one raid clears, which applies to everyone, is that it's okay to get a 3-phase. It's okay to take slightly longer to do an encounter if it means that you manage to get it done. Again, this is not a sprint. This is 48 hours long. You might think, yeah, well, it is a sprint for some people, and you'd be right if you're going for worlds first. That being said, even people chasing worlds first think it's important to not overcomplicate things.
Just to build on, like, if it works, it works point. I like to tie that into, you know, if somebody has already figured out something within an encounter and they're making progress doing that mechanic, and you know you're still wiping because you're trying to figure out other things, but you should leave that person who's already figured out part of it on that mechanic, and you shouldn't really, you know, have anybody try to overtake their role. You should leave it to them, and you know, if it becomes an issue later, then that's when you kind of start moving things around and try to figure out what's wrong. But if somebody's already figured something out within an encounter, then leave it to them, you know. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than XYZ person has figured out XYZ mechanic.
Something else which I hear from a lot of people about is your schedule. If you have something important to do on that day, you probably shouldn't be doing the day one raid. There is nothing worse than having somebody leave halfway through a day one attempt. It's almost impossible to find a competent raider who isn't already trying it with a team of their own. And before you know it, the whole raid team will break down. What I'm trying to say is that when you make a commitment to take part in a day one raid, you really need to clear your schedule, and you really need to make raiding your priority. Bear in mind that Bungie is touting the final shape raid in this case, but this goes for any day one raid, as one of the hardest activities in the entire game. You should expect to be trying to get it done for the whole day. So cancel your doctor's appointments, go to the gym the day before, cancel the date with that hot chick off of Tinder who's definitely not a bot, divorce your wife, become a hermit in the wilderness who somehow has a great internet connection. You need to do all these things in order to attempt a day one raid. Otherwise, you're just letting your team down. Okay, but seriously, clear your schedule. This also ties into my next point, which relates to keeping things chill and staying positive. It's okay to take several breaks throughout your run, and you're probably throwing if you don't. This doesn't apply to people purely racing though. This just applies to the 48 hours. The flip side of this, however, is actually one of my biggest pet peeves in raiding as a whole. Don't forget to put down rally flags and give the encounter another shot. I mentioned momentum earlier in this video, but I don't think people realize just how big of a difference it makes. One of the hardest challenges in raiding isn't actually the game itself, although that can be difficult sometimes. It's actually making sure everyone stays focused and on their A game for long enough to get the clear. If you take forever between a wipe and the next attempt, people are gonna get bored. If you've ever done a raid before, and I kinda hope you have if you're going for a day 1 clear, you'll probably know the pain of waiting for someone to grab a smoke or let their dog out, or read the entirety of War and Peace in one go, or watch all of Bife's 10-hour long lore video. You get the point. If people have to wait ages between encounters, they're much more likely to doubt things. Can we really get this clear? Do I want to stay up for another 3 hours to get it done? Would it be better just to give up and try again tomorrow? At the end of the day, stop taking ages between encounter attempts and you won't get stuck in the tower back rooms. More importantly, you'll be much more likely to get a day 1 clear. Going off of this, just try things. I know it sounds crazy, but if your friend has an idea and it just might work, just try things. The simpler, the better. Bungie typically doesn't go super far outside of the box, unless we're talking about the Vault in Last Wish, then yeah. But Bungie typically doesn't go super outside of the box on their raid encounters. There's usually some sort of sound or visual design element that is very clearly guiding the players to a part of the room. So don't overcomplicate things, but definitely just try things. I can use a personal anecdote from my Root of Nightmares clear with the Planets room, where we sat there, theory crafted and argued, but at the end of the day, when we finally tried something, it worked. Wow. The other thing that should be a no-brainer, but make sure you have all 3 characters at the highest power you can get them to, and be prepared to swap off your main if you need to. I know, nobody wants to stop playing the best class in the game, but you never know. Maybe. And sometimes when you need the damage or when you need some sort of small change after so many hours of attempts, it might be better to just have somebody come over to that other character. For example, in the Pantheon, having more hunters with Golden Gun and Celestial Nighthawk made getting damage for those platinum trophies a little bit easier. Well, that's everything I could really come up with for this video. If you have another piece of advice that you think people could benefit from on day 1, let me know in the comments down below. And if you are watching this on Raid Zone, because this could be played back right now, make sure you subscribe for that beautiful emblem. All right, guys, thank you. If you're not going to participate and do want to check in on the action, make sure to check out Raid Zone, or make sure to check out the highlight after Raid Zone is over, hosted by me and my wonderful, wonderful co-host, Mr. CB Gray. Thank you so much for watching, and here's to hoping for all of you to get that clear.